Hello, everyone. Welcome to Just M.E.T, the podcast where we talk about medicine, education, and technology, the driving forces of the future of healthcare. I'm Dr. Adith Chinnaswami, your host, and we'll be meeting a number of leading experts in the healthcare field who will talk to us about simulation, healthcare, education, and a lot more. Whether it's new medical practices or innovation in educational teaching, there is a lot more to be uncovered. You've just met the insights that are going to shape the future of healthcare training. Good evening, everyone. Happy to be here with Dr. Purva. She is a very charming person, someone I've loved talking to. We have started the conversation long before the cameras started rolling, but I'll give a short introduction for those who might not recognize her. So, ma'am is a preliminary expert of simulation-based healthcare training across UK, Europe, and well respected across the globe. She has been the director of simulation and director of medical education as well for Holyoke Medical School, and the former president of ASPE, which is the leading simulation society in UK and by extension Europe. So, ma'am, welcome to the show. Thank you for joining us. And I hope the introduction was sufficient. But if I left something out, please feel free to add.
No, absolutely. I mean, a very generous introduction. And it's an absolute pleasure to talk to you. So, more than happy to share my thoughts. And if it's helpful to the audience, more than happy to be here.
Thank you so much, ma'am. I have no doubts it will be helpful. I think there's a vast array of experience for us to learn from. I know we already spoke about this in passing and touched upon this, but I think I'd like to go back and maybe start from where you first went into simulation. I know you're an anesthetist by training. So how did the journey into simulation happen?
I think a very interesting question because I sort of seamlessly went from anesthesia into simulation. As you know, most of simulation started within anesthetics. And if you look at many of the simulation centers around the world, it's anesthetists who are leading on it.
Yes.
And I was exposed to simulation as a trainee. And when I became a consultant, I remember one of our senior consultants playing with one of the mannequins. I mean, he was actually at a social occasion in his house. I heard this sort of clicking noise. And I said, "What are you doing?" It was basically the mannequin that he had taken it apart and he was trying to repair it. So this is in early 2000s. And I had no idea what it was being used for, but I decided that that he needed help. And so I offered my help. And that's where inadvertently, I think, I learned putting it apart, taking it apart and putting it back together. But it's interesting, the journey of simulation for, I think, most anesthetists starts in the training period. But there is an opportunity for doctors to participate in medical education because we're all trainers and tutors. And then think that is where I moved into considering using simulation as a medical education tool because I was keen on educating, and therefore it seemed like a easy transition from learning about something which was technical to then moving it into an education tool.
Okay. That's very interesting, ma'am. I think putting together mannequins and from there the journey into simulation. So this was in UK, ma'am?
Yes.
So it started after you made the move?
Yes. Well, I went to UK a few weeks after my internship. So I've done all my training in the UK. So I've been in UK for 30 years now. So yes, I mean, medical education has evolved over a period of time. Having said that, simulation has come quite late, even to the UK. It's only in the early 2000s, as I said, we actually even started looking at it. But once we've embraced it, now it's integral and it's definitely, I would say, mainstream medical education. I mean, still, in my opinion, we can use it more widely, but within medical education, it's well utilized.
That's wonderful to hear, ma'am. Moving to the UK, I'm sure there's like a lot of nice experiences that had during the period. Some nice, some not so nice. Do you want to share something which was fun?
So the interesting experiences is about the accent. You might, even the other day, somebody was saying it's interesting after 30 years, you haven't lost your accent. Because I find sometimes people, especially when they come from overseas into the UK, you take on the local dialects or the accents to make it easier perhaps for patients or things like that. So the funny thing was I was in Liverpool in my registrar training, and the Scouser accent there is very difficult to understand. So one of the healthcare professionals couldn't understand what I was saying. So she said, do you speak English? And I said, yeah, I do, but I'm not quite sure that you do. So so that's a nice thing. And also, I think for overseas doctors, there is this challenge of adjusting to a different healthcare environment. And the NHS is a fantastic institution. I still say, despite all the troubles we're having, we're one of the finest healthcare services in the world. But I think it is for many overseas healthcare professionals, because now we, as you know, import nurses, allied healthcare professionals, ODPs, a whole lot. Adjustment does take a little while. Culturally, it's different.
Yes.
Patients' expectations is different. So it does require that little bit of adjustment. And sometimes it can be difficult. And if you look at doctors being referred to the GMC, this is publicly available data, that if you are of overseas origin, you're more likely to be referred to the GMC.
Okay.
Which is a scary thing in its own right. But considering the fact that not many doctors are referred, but it's a statistic which is well worth being aware of.
Got it.
And it's all the more important that you acclimatize and you embrace the way the NHS works.
Wow. That's very eye-opening, ma'am. And it's not something we're prepared to hear, but that's so even in education systems, do you think you had finished your undergrad year and then you moved there, so you experienced both systems?
Yes.
Where do we draw the parallels? I know that the Indian system is, I think we're very heavily banked on the UK system, right? FRCS and MRCS is still pretty much But where do the similarities lie from? What do you see as a translation from the UK system to the Indian system?
Yeah, I mean there are a lot of similarities. I mean, one of the biggest strengths of India is the patient population. So there's never any dearth of clinical material for learning. But I think one of the biggest challenges India now has is that the explosion of medical institutions is overwhelming even that patient population. So you have more in the private sector than in the public sector, and therefore your access to patient numbers are quite restricted. So in a way, I see both versions of healthcare happening in India. So 30 years ago, when I went to the UK, I would happily tell anybody that I could see 100 different variations of mid-diastolic murmur in my own institution. Whereas here, for the medical students, you've got to seek out somebody. Whereas I think today that is changing even in India. So patient population. But the big difference I feel, which I think India is actually addressing now, is what do you do with application of knowledge? A big disadvantage in the previous years was that we were very good on theory, less on application. So we could recite all the resuscitation algorithms. Ask us to apply it, we would struggle as an Indian trained doctor.
Yes.
Again, bedside skills, the art of speaking to a patient, the art of giving patients the right to making decisions, the culture of practicing evidence-based medicine. I think it was less a few years ago. It's becoming more mainstream now.
Yes. Very, very valid point, ma'am. I think there's something you mentioned in passing, like how within the Indian system now there's like a sea change over the last few years. And I think it's becoming a little polarized because we were a very confused nation, I would say, in terms of the number of institutions we had and the number of patients we were catering to. So we had roughly around 400 odd institutions when I started my undergrad. Now we are at around 700. And the target for the government is that we'll be at 1,000 in some time. And which means you'll have more government colleges opening up, meaning more patients will flow in there. So you're going to have one set of Indian doctors who have learned everything on the patient. At the same time, one set of doctors graduating from private hospitals, where the difference is going to be so marked that protocol wise and training regimens wise, they might be excellent, but patient exposure becomes a little limited just because we have so many colleges coming up. So, where do you see the equalization for this, ma'am? So, in terms of having two very different set of medical doctors are graduating out, and then I think probably I'll pause at this. I'll let you take that answer. Because, the follow-on is I also want to know when both these type of doctors try to enter another system like the NHS.
Yes.
So how do they adapt?
It's interesting because you're absolutely right. Because if you have doctors who are trained differently, the final product will also be different. So, and I completely get that. But I think there is a huge scope for by sharing resources, and I think that is something which will be explored in greater detail in India, because you have the extremes. There are very few countries in the world where you can see extremes of everything, and even in medical education resources. I mean, when I talk about medical education resources, one side is a patient population, the other side is the technological resources that are available in private institutions. Although the government is catching up with providing all those that infrastructure, I think there's an opportunity to share resources so that you have leveling of and leveling to a certain extent, standardization of the curriculum across the board. To a large extent, I think because you have a curriculum which is mandated, and you have a council that also regularly visits your various education institutions, to a large extent, I think you will be producing doctors of almost of a similar caliber. Right. Perhaps maybe more exposed to certain things in the public sector and more less in the private sector, and vice versa. When it comes to the NHS, a common point of entry, as you know, is PLAB, which is now going to be replaced by the MLA exams. And that is where I think I see some differences. Okay. Because the preparation for PLAB, the networking of the entrance into the UK, it all depends on where you're coming from. So there are two aspects or two ways of looking at your answer. One is the entry, and the second is how well do they adapt once they've entered. So the entry again depends on how well they prepare for the exam, their access to resources, access to friends, colleagues, access to taster sessions in the NHS, the ability to set up a clinical attachment in organizations. They have all of those, and entry becomes easier and less painful. And that I think it depends on where they come from. there are certain institutions who prepare you apparently for your USMLE exam as part of your final year preparation, for instance. So for those sort of institutions and the students who come through there, it's a very different environment. But once you get it, I think it all again depends on what your curriculum is. So many institutions in the UK use a PBL approach. The PBL approach is catching up here, but not everybody uses it. I'm not a great fan of the PBL approach, but having said that, it prepares you differently to the life in the NHS. So the PLAB or the MLA exams should be that bridge which will help you to prepare for an entry. So acclimatizing to the NHS might be easier if you come from an institution which has already prepared you for life abroad.
Got it.
Rather than having to start from scratch. So that might be the difference.
I think that's a very interesting point to consider for students if they want to start planning their career as to where they have to start preparing and how early the preparation has to start. So this actually opens up a wide array of questions, ma'am. So in terms of standardization, then like you pointed out, sure, I think without doubt, we can say that simulation based training is going to standardize certain areas. But how are you seeing the uptake of simulation based training? When you compare India and UK, because you saw the adoption curve in UK, I would say that India is just about gathering momentum with the same curve. Do you think mindsets are similar, or do you think there's
No, I think it's interesting because when I first started doing simulation here in India, it was part of the work I did within obstetric anesthesia. So I was a bit of a novelty those years because nobody else did simulations. I would run scenarios as part of big conferences. But in the 10 years, or probably, 10, 12, 13 years, now I see a completely different set of conditions. So there is extensive uptake of simulation. I think there's a general acceptance that simulation is here to stay.
Even in India?
Even in India.
Good.
And there is definitely an enthusiasm in picking it up as a modality and running with it. I suppose where the challenge comes is that because it's being mandated in the curriculum, the way it is being rolled out is a bit worrying, in the sense that if it falls in the hands of people who don't understand simulation, then it will be it will place the institution in a situation where they have adopted it like a tick box.
Got it.
If it falls in the hands of somebody who understands simulation, then obviously it won't be a tick box. It will be a genuine embedding of simulation in the curriculum with good benefit for the learners and ultimately the patients. So the uptake is definitely there. I think it's less about the uptake and more about what the next steps are going to be.
I think that's spot on, ma'am. So then this leaves us, I would say it leads us to a very interesting scenario where everyone knows that, yes, we have to enforce simulation-based education. Not a lot of us know what's the best way to do it. And say programs like some of what you've conducted in the past and what you continue to do are a good way of knowledge transfer. But do you think that's the best way to accelerate the knowledge transfer, in terms of ensuring that we have people who are trained and who truly understand simulation? Because right now, as you correctly pointed out, there's a paucity of professionals who can run the actual lab or the facility, or even set up the strategy for that matter. So what do you think would be the best way to actually accelerate that particular knowledge transfer?
Yeah. See, you're absolutely right. I mean, the number one challenge for nearly all systems in delivering medical education, whether it is with simulation or without, is availability of faculty.
Mm.
And it is more important, the availability of appropriately trained content expert faculty. And if we want to accelerate the uptake of simulation, or we want to accelerate good medical education, then we must invest our time and resources in supporting our faculty. And the two aspects of it, it's not just about a one-off faculty development program. It's continuing professional development and supplementing it with time. Because one of the things that I commonly hear, including the workshop I've just run today, is that faculty are expected to deliver education as part of their clinical role with no recognition either for the time or the effort that is gone into it. And the only reason they do it is because it's leaving behind a legacy. It is giving back something to the system has given to them. And I think it's high time that this is properly recognized. And it is absolutely integral to the future of an organization, because if the staff are not well supported and looked after, you can't get a good service. And if you can't get a good service, your patients are not going to be happy. So I think it's very, very important that faculty are supported.
So what kind of support are we looking at, ma'am? So of course, building out the maybe enforcing certain policies in place, which probably free up their time, or like kind of have dedicated personnel towards the process. But where does the recognition coming from? Is that do you think there is value to international faculty or international collaborations, or the faculty getting recognized for this particular endeavor on a global stage? Do you think all of these are major factors, or are there other factors in the background?
So I think one thing I would always say is that, and I talk a lot about evidence-based practice and evidence-based approaches. There is the educational community, I mean, especially post-COVID, with us being virtual. The globalization of simulation is something that we all talk about. There are no more boundaries. It's just all disappeared, especially when we can contact. There's an online community that you can reach into. So I think we should not reinvent the wheel, because luckily for India, they can learn from the mistakes of other healthcare sectors and countries. So why repeat the same mistakes that we did when we were embedding simulation, for instance, in our curriculum? What are the things you can learn that the West has done differently in terms of faculty? What sort of faculty development courses are already there? What is interesting is it's creating a course is not that difficult, but contextualizing it and making it locally relevant is really, really important. And for that, you need a community of well-trained faculty within the country.
Yes.
So international collaboration, I think, is important because I think, as I said, you don't need to reinvent the wheel. But following the collaboration should also allow India to generate locally relevant solutions.
Yes. So this always brings me to one particular theory of mine. I'm going to test it out. You can feel free to correct me. I always feel the mannequin-based systems of simulation, of course, there are particular areas where it's an absolute must, have been designed with the Western systems in mind, where the trainer part is like very, very well proportioned in a populous country like ours, where we have 250 students in a batch coming in. I don't see how that kind of a system can directly be translated to the Indian medical system. And I always feel like that's where, when we really have to learn from, maybe not mistakes from the West, but realize that the same system is not going to bear fruit for us.
Yeah. I mean, the points you said is absolutely right, because I think investing for the sake of investing is not right. So you can flood your centers with all the expensive mannequins, but if it doesn't serve the purpose of the educational community you're dealing with, then it's a complete waste. And of course, as you rightly said, the mannequins may be relevant depending upon which objective you're hoping to achieve.
Yes.
The second point, of course, is there is this concept about what is simulation all about. Now, we are actually moving away in the West from calling simulation as purely an educational tool. Simulation is now used for transformation of systems and processes. It's seen as a quality improvement tool. It is seen as a tool for error prevention. It is seen as a tool which can make a significant difference in enhancing quality and safety within healthcare organizations. So when the West is moving so rapidly towards embracing simulation in a slightly different way, I think we should recognize that, as you said, dealing with simulation as a purely mannequin-based modality is a bit outdated.
Got it.
There are other aspects that can be used and should be used, which are probably more relevant, especially if you're dealing with undergraduate medical education, medical or nursing or any form of undergraduate education. So I think being conscious of what you need the resources for, linking it with the curriculum that you're aiming it for, and then also learning from the West or learning from when I say West, basically learning from any community that has used simulation for a while can actually help guide investment.
I think that's spot on, ma'am. And the idea that setting up of labs, this is something which now we are all going after. And we often, during the course of my conversation with a few institutions, while we're talking about setting up labs, there's always a question of, what's the model so-and-so university has used? We all look up to certain universities. And absolutely fair questions of the university's past, right? And can you get us a collaboration with them? I understand where that comes from the Indian institutions. We've associated certain institutions to benchmarks of quality. I think that's kind of ingrained in us when we go through the medical system, purely because of the books and the authors and who've been writing that and the research papers that we come across. But while we can see that from an Indian institution's point as maybe a symbol of quality assurance or something along those lines, what is it that the international institutions actually look for when they're going for a collaboration with an Indian university?
I think it's two aspects. One is how can they contribute to research, and the other is how it can contribute to reputation. So from a research perspective, I think most institutions are looking for large scale, because multi-center trials, increasing the participants or increasing the target audience. You have a better patient population. India sometimes is more agile in gathering the data, and perhaps it's easier to also get through the various ethics formalities because you have more private universities. Access to funding sometimes is more likely to happen in the West if you are seen to be in collaboration with a developing country. Although interestingly, I don't think India is counted as developing anymore. And then, of course, the reputation, because most organizations want to be seen as organizations with international reach. So having a partner or being able to say that you're working with such an organization which is outside of your country certainly raises your profile. It attracts, if you're a medical school, it attracts international students, which is definitely an income generating opportunity for the schools as well.
Good to know that it goes both ways, ma'am. It's always something which is we've been prickly about in the past, but great to hear that things are changing, because now everyone around the globe, not just with the medical field, right, are recognizing the role India is going to play in the near future when it comes to geopolitics. So it's very heartening to see that that's the fact even with other fields. And this kind of knowledge transfer, ma'am. So when it comes to simulation in particular, do you see any hurdles which have to be particularly crossed to ensure cross system collaboration for simulation in particular? Are there any things which you see as like definite hurdles which someone has to clear before something like that can materialize?
So, international collaboration, I mean, between, I suppose, between any country, it's the universities will have very different expectations before an MOU can be signed or even an MOA can be signed. So, and there's also the issue of whether they actually want to partner as well. And there is a limit to how many you would you might want to associate, but you may not want a formal MOU. You might want an MOA, you want to test the waters, you want to see whether culturally the two universities can work together. There's always this issue of exchange of faculty, whether that is feasible, if there's interest, if the focus of the universities can be aligned. And there's also culturally, universities may not see themselves being as partners. And also there is this political side of things as well. You may not want to associate with certain countries. There is this political agenda, which depends as well. So I think it's on a superficial level. I suppose any collaboration is seen positively, but taking it to the next level, you have to be a little bit more.
There are so many factors which
That's right.
that influence the decision making in the background. That's wonderful to hear, ma'am. I think that like it's eye opening in terms of what all people have to think about when they're looking for a collaboration, rather than my university has this collaborations. Since we went so far, I'm going to pull it back and probably ask you about a little bit about when we started simulation, and what is the strongest pushback you ever had, and can you give me like can you tell me how you overcame that?
Yeah. I think the strongest pushback, I think, is common to most simulation enthusiasts, is when your organization or your the agency which provides you your funding does not recognize you as an income generating or as educationally relevant. And you would always have, so one of the toughest pushbacks I had was from one of the senior management individuals. So when I was a director of medical education, I had a medical director who did not believe that simulation making a difference to medical education. So that's as high as it can get. And as so it was interesting when years later, when I became the medical director, I recognized how little we speak of education in board level conversations in a healthcare organization. So this is not just about simulation, about education. And for many healthcare organizations, education sometimes gets in the way
of the clinical services.
Because and that I think is such a and even though I was an educationalist sitting on the board, when it comes to the crux of releasing your staff so that they can go and deliver an education session, you still have to ask yourself, okay, if I let's send off my surgeons for these 2 sessions, who's going to do who's going to backfill? Where is the money coming from? And the question also is, you have staff in the simulation center. Who's going to pay for them? And you have junior doctors who have to go and do a mandatory set of training. when they're gone, who's going to run the war? So, and I don't think I've ever managed to overcome that resistance.
Wow. Okay.
Because yes, you can say it is wonderful, there's evidence is there, but the practicalities of supporting education at the front line, it's always seen at the expense of clinical delivery, which is, while I don't think anybody will stop you, because everybody recognizes without education you can't have the next generation of healthcare professionals. But
Tough, right?
yes, and that is very concerning, and also and especially when you're so passionate about education, it's very difficult to fight against it. But I'd like to think that there are more educationalists getting into the senior positions, and therefore we'll be able to influence the agenda better.
Absolutely. I think it's like that's very, very I can see how passionate you are when you're speaking about it. I have like had previous conversations as well. Can I infer this from what you just said? Do you think there's going to be some point in the future where we figure out a way to dissociate clinical service from education, health education?
And yeah,
I'm
we should deal with it as one of as another care group. we have all your specialties are in different care groups. Education should also sit in a care group. It should be given a budget. It should be given resources, and it should be treated as an entity. But along with that will come the question that most educationalists are not very good at answering, which is return on investment. So I think unless educationalists also change the way they look at education and look at it as a return and find ways of utilizing resources more effectively, efficiently, look for return on investment, are more savvy in the way they buy resources. I think we'll continue to have the same question. So yes, I think it should become mainstream. But for that, the educators also have to change their way of thinking and the strategy towards education.
Yes, I think I firmly believe we are in the crux of that. I think the previous generation of systems were extremely faculty dependent. Even now, with one of the core areas that we always focus on in discussions with institutions is how much time we save. So in one of the presentations I did recently, we spoke about how much time it takes to set up one simulation scenario for one student to learn a basic skill. And I think it computed to somewhere around 3.76 lakh minutes needed to train one batch of students.
Wow.
In a year.
I believe that,
for about 10 skills.
Yeah.
So that's where now you realize that, the alternate technologies are coming in, virtual reality, augmented reality, haptic trainers, where it saves so much time for the doctors. And in some cases, it lets doctors continue to be service providers rather than teachers. That change that you're speaking about, I firmly believe that it's something which is happening as we speak, man. And I think I've had a wonderful time speaking. I've probably lost track of all segments of time.
Sure, that's it.
Before we wind up, I would like to probably ask you one final question. Where do you see simulation-based training and skill training labs in the next, say, decade? Like, what do you think an ideal simulation?
So I sort of alluded to it in one of my previous answers. I think labs should not be in existence on their own. They should be part of the clinical environment. Because currently you have it in a standalone location. Even if it is on the same floor of the hospital, it's still a different floor.
Got it. Okay.
So education, and that is the problem we have. The reason why education is seen differently is because it's seen separate to clinical delivery. I would hope that it is seen as part of clinical delivery. So you would have a skills lab in every clinical area.
Mhm.
So that is one thing I would say. And I would see simulation, as I said previously, no longer as a pure educational tool, but as a clinical delivery tool. So something that everybody, even a non-educationalist, will use simulation to understanding how a system works, how a process works. And therefore, indirectly, what you would see is that educationalists will no longer have to argue the case for education, because simulation would have already argued its case in non-educational areas.
Brilliant, ma'am.
Mhm.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for taking the time and joining us. I hope to do this a few more times in the near future when our time permits.
Absolutely. A real pleasure, and thank you for inviting me.
Of course. Pleasure, ma'am. Thank you. Thank you for joining us on Just Met. I really hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you did enjoy today's episode, like, share, subscribe. Until next time.